The White House Correspondents' Dinner, an annual ritual where power dresses up in humor and pretends it's human for one night. But behind the lights, behind the punchlines, something darker was bubbling. The moment came fast. The host delivered. A line, a tame dig, a name drop. President Obama handled crises with grace. Imagine if Twitter had been his first instinct. The crowd chuckled. But Donald Trump didn't just laugh, he barked. Not the kind of laugh that joins in. The kind that mocks. Sharp, loud, intentional. Heads turned, faces tightened. Reporters looked at one another, not sure if it was funny or something else. He leaned back in his seat, smug and satisfied, letting the echo of his derision hang, like smoke in the chandeliered air. Across the ballroom, the camera found him. Barack Obama. Silent, still, eyes forward, a measured breath. The former president didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He simply watched, as if he'd seen this moment long before it ever arrived. Trump glanced over. Maybe he expected a smirk, a shrug, a return jab. Instead, he saw something unfamiliar: restraint sharpened into power, and in that instant, the room felt it. Not the joke, not the laugh, the shift. A cold current cut through the glitz. Laughter faded. The performers stopped performing. History, it seemed, had pressed record. Because that wasn't just a laugh. It was a line being crossed, a private war made public. A man emboldened by cruelty, laughing at the legacy of another who had shouldered the weight of dignity in silence. But what no one in that room could have predicted, not the pundits scribbling quotes, not the influencers live streaming for likes, not even Trump himself, was that this laugh would be the spark. The spark that reignited a fire many thought had gone cold. The spark that would force America to choose between volume and value, between showmanship and statesmanship, because what came next wasn't just a comeback, it was a reckoning, and it would shake the nation to its core. Before the laugh echoed across that chandeliered ballroom, before the smirk, before the silence, there were years of seeds being sown. It didn't begin on that stage. It began on a different kind of platform. A tabloid tycoon with a taste for spectacle stood before cameras and microphones, holding up a lie like it was a trophy. Why hasn't he shown his birth certificate? Donald Trump asked, not once, but again and again. Not because he believed it, but because they did. Or at least, they wanted to. The birther movement wasn't just a conspiracy. It was a campaign. A deliberate, strategic questioning of Barack Obama's Americanness. His right to belong, his right to lead, his right to exist in the highest office of a country built by immigrants, but still uncomfortable with the idea of a black man commanding the resolute desk. And for Trump, it worked. Each time he stoked the flames, the crowd got louder. He saw something. He understood something. In the age of retweets and outrage, doubt was more powerful than evidence. Mockery was more effective than fact. The rallies started to sound like performance art. Chants, caps, camera-ready chaos. Obama wasn't just a former president. He was Trump's foil, his target, and his measuring stick. While Obama gave measured speeches, Trump fired off bombastic one-liners. While Obama quoted Lincoln, Trump called reporters enemies of the people. While Obama paused to think, Trump stormed ahead with sound bites and swagger. It wasn't just a contrast, it was a culture war, packaged as reality television. For millions of Americans, Obama represented something personal. The idea that intellect, compassion, and grace could lead. He stood for multiracial America, for civility, for the quiet power of restraint. But for Trump's base, that same restraint looked like weakness. That calm demeanor felt elitist. The professor president made them feel small, and Trump knew how to make them feel big again. Every jab, every tweet, every dog whistle wasn't random. It was coded communication. He's not like us, He doesn't get it. He's not really one of us. And Trump? He laughed with them. Not because the joke was funny, but because the message landed. Every time he laughed at Obama, he was laughing with a crowd that wanted permission to dismiss progress, dignity, complexity. Obama never publicly lashed out, but the silence was heavy. Every insult absorbed, every slight met with composure, only deepened the rift. Two men, two visions of America. One shouting over the noise, the other standing through it. And yet neither could exist without the other. Trump needed Obama as a villain to rage against, and Obama, for better or worse, became the living mirror showing the nation what leadership could be, and what it had become. So when Trump laughed that night, it wasn't just a joke at Obama's expense. It was years of resentment, projection, and strategic theater climaxing in a single smirk. But even he didn't realize. The stage was shifting, and the next act wouldn't go according to his script. Donald Trump didn't stumble into politics. He swaggered into it on a gold escalator, under the Klieg lights of the cameras he'd been courting for decades. He didn't enter the political arena like a statesman. He stormed in like a showman, armed not with policy, but with punchlines. He understood something essential about America's media machine. Outrage sells, conflict gets clicks, and mockery? Mockery sticks. Before he was a candidate, he was a spectacle. The Apprentice turned boardrooms into boxing rings. Every episode a judgment, every firing a performance. But behind the slogan and spray tan was a deeper instinct, humiliation as currency. When he pivoted to politics, he didn't change tactics. He just changed targets. The birther lie was his opening number, a racist insinuation wrapped in faux curiosity. He paraded it on morning shows and cable news panels demanding transparency while knowingly sowing division. And when he wasn't challenged hard enough, he smiled. When Obama eventually released his birth certificate, Trump claimed credit. "I did a good job," he said. "I got him to do something nobody else could." He didn't apologize. He boasted, because in Trump's world, shame is for the weak, and doubling down is a show of strength. As his rallies began, so did the mockery. He gave his opponents nicknames like a playground bully with a microphone: Little Marco, Crooked Hillary, Low Energy Jeb, Sleepy Joe. The crowd ate it up. They laughed not because the jokes were clever, but because they were cruel. Cruelty wasn't a bug in Trump's persona, it was the whole operating system, and his greatest insult wasn't aimed at policy or governance. It was tone. Trump mocked Obama's voice, his pauses, his professor-like delivery. "He talks so slow," Trump sneered at a rally. "Like he thinks we're all taking notes." The audience roared. Mockery became strategy. When facts failed, he'd pivot to derision. If someone exposed him, he'd call them boring. If someone criticized him, he'd call them ugly or stupid. It wasn't about winning arguments, it was about drowning them in noise. Twitter became his Coliseum. 280-character jabs, morning tirades, late-night threats. Each tweet a grenade thrown into the national conversation. He'd insult journalists, immigrants, war heroes. No one was off limits. And still he laughed. That crooked grin. That smug squint. Not because it was funny, but because he was winning. Each laugh was a victory lap, a reminder that the rules didn't apply to him. That shame didn't stick. That mockery could replace merit. Some in the media treated it like a circus. Headlines used words like unconventional and outsider. Cable news carried his speeches live, fascinated by the chaos. "He says what others won't," pundits said. "He's entertaining." But others sounded the alarm. Columnists, historians, psychologists. They warned that this wasn't just populism, it was performance authoritarianism. A playbook pulled from strongmen around the world: mock, distract, dominate. And yet through all of it, One man never responded in kind. Barack Obama. He absorbed the hits, the dog whistles, the insults, the fake scandals. He refused to descend into the mud not because he couldn't, but because he wouldn't. Obama knew the price of dignity. He knew that for men like him, black men in power rage would be twisted into threat. So he held the line. Calm. Focused. Above it. And for years, Trump laughed louder. Until that night, that one moment, that one smirk. The spark that ignited something no insult ever could, because there is one rule even Trump couldn't rewrite. Mockery wins the crowd, but truth moves history. And history was about to answer back. Barack Obama didn't come from legacy. He didn't inherit a real estate empire. He didn't grow up with spotlights and microphones. His story began on the margins, raised by a single mother in Hawaii, a kid with a strange name and skin too dark for some and too light for others. He was born into contradiction, belonging nowhere, yet determined to belong somewhere. He read voraciously, searching for himself in pages that rarely reflected his face. He wrote poetry before policy, thought deeply before he ever spoke publicly. And when he walked into community centers on the south side of Chicago, it wasn't cameras that greeted him. It was broken systems, broken promises, and people tired of being invisible. But he listened. That was always his first instinct. Before the speeches, before the movement, he listened. The boy with the funny name became the man with the voice. America didn't know it needed until it heard it. He wasn't supposed to make it. He was told it was too soon, too risky, too bold. But he ran anyway, because hope wasn't just a slogan, it was a dare. A challenge to a country still learning how to live up to its own ideals. And when he stood before that crowd in 2008 and said, "This is our moment," he wasn't just talking to Democrats. He was talking to every kid who'd ever been told they were too different, too foreign, too other. But hope comes at a cost. From the very beginning, they came for him. The whisper campaigns, the sly jokes. He doesn't love America. He's not really one of us. They questioned his church, his family, his birth certificate, his very right to exist in that office. And still he smiled, not because it didn't hurt, but because he refused to let them see him break. He wore dignity like armor, cool under pressure, thoughtful in debate. When opponents shouted, he paused. When they attacked, he reflected. Even when they weaponized his own name, emphasizing it like a warning, he turned it into a symbol of pride. And behind the poise was pain. Pain he rarely spoke about. The pain of knowing that every misstep would be magnified, that a raised voice would be called angry, that a justified emotion would be twisted into a threat. So he carried that weight, quietly, proudly. He joked about his cool dad demeanor, but beneath the calm was calculation. He knew the world was watching, not just America, the world, looking to see if the United States could live up to the promise of a man like him. And in moments of crisis, school shootings, terror attacks, economic collapse, he didn't rush to blame. He didn't perform rage. He extended empathy. He steadied the nation. Because Barack Obama didn't just represent policies, he represented possibility. A possibility that children of immigrants, children of color, could lead, not just survive. A possibility that intelligence wasn't something to be mocked, but admired. A possibility that the country could heal, not just fight. His presidency was far from perfect. He knew that. Critics from all sides pressed in. But he never lost the center of who he was. Never lost that moral compass. And for 8 years, he endured the mockery, the memes, the coded insults, and, later, the open ones. Not with retaliation, but with resolve. Because Obama understood something his loudest detractor never could, that real strength doesn't shout. It stands and waits. And when the moment is right, it speaks. Not for applause, but for legacy. So when Trump laughed across that ballroom, when the smirk broke through the noise, it wasn't just mockery. It was the echo of years of attacks. And Obama? He didn't flinch because he knew something Trump didn't. Something louder than laughter. Sometimes silence is strategy. When Barack Obama left the White House, he didn't vanish. He didn't retreat into silence. He gave the new president space as tradition demanded. But tradition, as always, was a one-way street. Trump didn't wait. He couldn't. Within weeks of taking office, he called Obama's tenure a disaster, the worst deal-maker in history. The man who left America broken. His voice didn't just echo in press conferences, it blared on Twitter, on Fox News, at rallies lit like wrestling matches. Every insult was a headline. Every claim a provocation. He blamed Obama for everything: the economy, the deep state, the leaks, the division, the pandemic that hadn't even begun. And each time he said the name Obama, he didn't just spit it out, he loaded it, like ammunition. The subtext was never subtle. But Obama still didn't take the bait. Instead, he showed up where he always had: college campuses, humanitarian summits, quiet foundations doing loud work. When he spoke, it was measured, reflective. But his words landed like thunder in rooms filled with thunderous silence. He never named Trump directly. He didn't have to. "We don't need to bully our way to the top," he said at one speech. "Being loud isn't the same as being right," he said at another. And then, on a stage in Illinois, "When you hear people dismissing facts, mocking science, undermining democracy, you must speak up." The crowd erupted. Because everyone knew who he was speaking to and who he was speaking about. The media called it a shadow presidency. Trump called it disrespectful. But the contrast was clear. One man shouted into the void, desperate for loyalty. The other whispered into history, and people leaned in to listen. Then came the event, a public forum. Televised, tense, the room packed, cameras locked in. Trump stood behind the podium, tossing out barbs like candy. "We're cleaning up a mess. That should have never happened," he jeered. "It was 8 years of weakness, 8 years of apologies." He smirked again. The same smirk from that ballroom. And for a moment, it seemed like another monologue of mockery was underway. Until the camera cut. And there he was, Barack Obama, not red-faced, not retaliating, just rising. He walked slowly, calmly. No music, no fire, just presence. The applause started slow, then swelled into something electric. Even the anchors lost their composure. Twitter feeds lit up before he said a word. He stood at the microphone, looked out, then said simply, "Leadership isn't about tearing down the past to feel bigger in the present." The air thinned. The crowd leaned in. Trump shifted. For the first time, visibly, Obama hadn't come to brawl. He had come to draw a line. In what would become the most replayed moment of the decade, he continued layer by layer reclaiming truth, reframing the narrative, without ever calling Trump by name, because he didn't have to. The words, the tone, the silence between the sentences, it all hit harder than any insult could. And the world watched. Phones recorded. Commentators gasped. Not because it was loud, but because it was surgical. This wasn't a debate, this was a reckoning. And the man who had weathered years of attacks had finally chosen to rise, not in anger, but in legacy. The crowd wasn't ready. But Obama had waited for this moment. And what he said next would change everything. The room had gone still, not with silence, but with anticipation. Obama stood at the podium, fingers lightly touching its edge, his shoulders squared, voice held just below the surface, not angry, not amused, controlled. The kind of control that makes people nervous because they know what's coming isn't noise, it's truth. He looked out across the crowd. His gaze wasn't defiant. It was patient, like a man who had seen this game before and was tired of pretending it was worth playing. "No matter how loud some folks get," he began, "it doesn't make them right." The crowd stirred. "And no matter how many times they repeat a lie," he continued, "it doesn't make it true." There was no fire in his voice, just steel. Each sentence sharpened to precision, landing like hammer blows wrapped in velvet. Didn't mention Trump by name. He didn't have to. They call leadership weakness. They call compassion weakness. They think cruelty is strength. Mockery is intelligence. But let me be clear. He paused, letting the moment breathe. The air felt electric. Being loud isn't the same as being strong. Gasps rippled through the audience. Cameras zoomed in. Reporters froze mid-tweet. Obama continued, "Slower now, measured. You can build an empire on insults. You can fill arenas with fear. You can trend every day for being outrageous. But history?" Another pause. "History doesn't remember who shouted the most. It remembers who stood up when it mattered most." The crowd was holding its breath. Even the opposition sat still, unsure whether to scoff or stay silent. "You can laugh at sacrifice," he said. "You can mock service. But you don't erase dignity by laughing at it. You only reveal how little you understand it." The line hit like thunder. Applause erupted. But Obama held his hand up not to stop the clapping, but to remind them he wasn't done yet. He looked off camera, as if addressing not just the audience, but the country watching behind screens, behind phones, behind division. "This moment we're in, it's not just about politics," he said. "It's about character. It's about whether we reward spectacle over substance, whether we want leaders who reflect our fears or our hopes." He let that sit, let it echo. Then the final blow. "They laughed at me once. That's fine. But I've learned when they laugh, they're afraid. Because deep down, they know something they'll never say out loud." Another pause. Every soul in the room leaned in. That no matter how loud they shout, they still can't erase what we've already built together. A beat, the crowd erupted. Applause, shouts, a full standing ovation. Not polite, not political, personal. Phones were up. Live streams caught the moment. Clips uploaded within seconds. Within minutes, it was everywhere. Obama's revenge. Mic drop moment. Loud is not strong. Commentators were speechless. Hosts on morning shows played it on loop. TikTok creators turned it into cinematic edits. Late-night monologues quoted the line with reverence. It wasn't just a speech, it was a declaration. Meanwhile, backstage, Trump was watching. Folded arms. Forced grin. The eyes didn't lie, there was no punchline left. He tweeted within minutes, something dismissive, something generic. "Just words," he wrote. Same old boring stuff. But the likes weren't the same. The replies weren't the same. Something had shifted. Because for years Trump had mocked, he had yelled, he had bulldozed, and finally someone had answered. Not with rage, not with noise, with something far more dangerous to a man like Trump. Composure, clarity, conviction, and most devastating of all, a crowd that didn't just clap, they stood. Because they knew they weren't just witnessing a rebuttal. They were witnessing a moment of reclaiming. Obama had never needed to shout to be heard. But when he chose to speak, the world listened, and Trump for the first time looked like the only one not in on the joke. The clip was less than 2 minutes long, but it detonated across the internet like a cultural supernova. It started with a phone-recorded upload from the back row. Grainy, wobbly, capturing the exact moment Barack Obama delivered the line. "Being loud isn't the same as being strong." The video hit Twitter first. Within an hour, it had 1 million views. Then TikTok got a hold of it. Within 2 hours, there were remixes Obama's voice set to trap beats, to orchestral strings, to silence for emphasis. Teens recreated the moment with captions and slow zooms. One creator stitched the speech into a montage of civil rights icons, ending with the words, "Legacy speaks louder." A 12-year-old in Atlanta made an animated short stick figures in suits, one yelling, the other standing tall. It ended with the crowd rising, the loud one shrinking. The title? Loud Strong. 3 million views by sunset. Ellen shared it the next day. Reddit threads exploded. Instagram stories were flooded with screenshots of quotes from the speech in white text on black backgrounds. Spotify saw a spike in Obama's previous speeches. Tumblr dusted itself off to make mood boards. Even LinkedIn saw a flurry of posts with captions like, "Leadership is about presence, not performance." And then came the memes. Trump's frozen expression at the end of the speech, mouth slightly open, arms stiff, became a canvas. When you realize the substitute teacher just schooled you. When the clapback is presidential. When facts walk in and tweets walk out. Late-night hosts looped the footage with slow-motion zooms and swelling music. One show edited it like a boxing match. Another dubbed it with the Kill Bill siren. Even celebrities jumped in. Kerry Washington tweeted, "That's my president, Chris Evans." When the grown-ups speak, sit down. Oprah posted a still of Obama mid-speech with one word, truth. Meanwhile, conservative commentators scrambled to reframe the moment. Some called it divisive. Others said it was theatrics, a desperate grab for relevance. One anchor claimed the speech lacked respect, but their clips didn't go viral because no one was buying it. The moment had already transcended the spin cycle, and for ordinary Americans, it wasn't about punditry. It was personal. In a Detroit barber shop, a father and son watched the replay, in silence. The father whispered, "That's how you do it." In a diner in Phoenix, a waitress teared up while watching the clip on her break. "I forgot what a president could sound like," she said. Hashtags flooded every platform. Mic drop moment, Obama's revenge, it loudest not strong. People weren't just sharing it, they were reliving it. Because for years, many had swallowed frustration, bit their tongues through mockery, through gaslighting, through the constant fire hose of outrage. But this felt like vindication, a quiet reckoning, not in rage, but in reminder. That dignity hadn't died. That someone had been listening, watching, waiting to speak not just to the nation, but for it. The emotional undercurrent was impossible to ignore. Tweets poured in. "I showed this to my daughter. She smiled like she did in 2008. I forgot how good truth sounds until I heard it again. We've been through hell. But that gave me hope." Obama's speech wasn't trending because it was political. It was trending because it was human, and, while the media tried to analyze the moment, the people had already decided what it meant. It meant the tide was turning. And then, the real shock came. Days later, almost quietly, polling numbers shifted. Undecided voters swung by 6 points. Approval for Trump dipped below 30% for the first time in over a year. More surprisingly, 18 to 24-year-olds listed Obama's speech as the most inspiring political moment of the year, beating any campaign event, debate, or ad cable networks were caught off guard. It hadn't been a campaign. It had been a correction, and the laugh that had echoed in that ballroom? It had finally met its answer. Barack Obama never circled back to that moment with bravado. He didn't post a victory lap. He didn't gloat. That wasn't his style. But weeks later, during a small town hall with young leaders, someone asked him, "How do you deal with being mocked, misunderstood, lied about, and still keep your head up?" He smiled, took a breath, then said quietly, "You don't need to shout to be heard. You just have to know why you're speaking in the first place." It wasn't a clapback. It was a principle, and like much of what he'd said in that fateful speech, it reached deeper than the surface. Beyond politics, beyond rivalry, into something more human. Because this wasn't about one man mocking another. It was about two visions of what power looks like. One built on volume, the other on values. One playing to the cheap seats, the other speaking to the long arc of justice. Trump had built his legacy on dominance of being the loudest, the boldest, the one who never backed down. But the cost of that dominance had always been depth. His empire was made of sound, temporary, inflated, measured in minutes of attention, not miles of impact. Obama? His legacy wasn't in tweets or takedowns. It was in restraint, in patience. In that quiet understanding that power held back is stronger than power flaunted. And when he finally did speak, the result wasn't just applause. It was a shift in the air. People remembered how it felt to hear words that aimed higher, words that didn't insult, didn't belittle, didn't turn pain into punchlines. People remembered what leadership sounded like. Narrators would later call it a defining cultural moment. But to many, it was something more sacred. It was permission to believe again. It was reassurance that even after years of noise and erosion, dignity had not disappeared. It had simply been waiting for the moment when America would need it most. And when that moment came, it wasn't anger that moved the nation. It was grace, because what made that speech unforgettable wasn't how hard it hit. It was how deeply it healed. A nation bruised by division saw a man refuse to divide. A people mocked for dreaming saw someone speak with clarity, not contempt. And in the years to come, when history looks back not just at elections or poll numbers, but at character, the contrast will be undeniable. Trump will be remembered for the noise, Obama for the presence. One broke things to feel powerful. The other built something that still stands. And that night, in a room filled with echoes, with cameras, with tension, dignity didn't raise its voice. It simply stood up, because in the end, history sides with the one who builds, not the one who burns. Trump laughed. He laughed because he thought the story was his to write. Because he believed that noise would win. That mockery would erase memory. But America remembered. It remembered who rose when mocked, who spoke when silence mattered, who showed that calm isn't weakness, and that legacy is written not in sound bites, but in substance. This wasn't just a moment between two men. It was a choice between two paths, one driven by ego, the other by empathy, one shouting for attention, the other standing for something greater. So now, the question isn't just what happened, it's what happens next. If you believe that dignity is stronger than division, if you believe that leadership should lift, not lower, if you believe that the voice of reason can still outlast the roar of cruelty, share this story. Let the world know whose laugh didn't last and whose voice still echoes. Comment your moment of inspiration. Tag someone who needs to hear this. And remember, silence can be thunder. And legacies? They're not built on noise. They're built on truth. Subscribe to join the movement, because the story isn't over.